Well, hello there, Newegg audience. We're gonna talk about something, a piece of electronics that have been in the Newegg studios for a while that I've been lusting after. And to talk about this beautiful slab sitting in between us, we've got Matt from GIGABYTE and the Aorus team to talk us through the Aorus AD27QD.
Yeah.
I got it right.
Yes, you
Okay,
did.
good.
So this one actually makes sense. AD, Aorus display, 27-inch,
The size.
QHD, QD.
Excellent.
So we tried to make it, a little bit more palatable for you guys.
And now that you say that, it makes sense. So that's good. I have a hard time when a company's got like an alphanumeric string.
Yeah, well, the best is RAM. So if you get RAM sticks, it's like 16 digits, and if you know what each digit corresponds to, it totally makes sense. It's the CAS latency, it's the memory manufacturer, it's what factory it came out of, what data was manufactured. Like, it all makes sense, but when you look at it, it might as well be in Chinese.
But now, thankfully, we don't have that issue.
Yeah, for this one, it's pretty much plug and play, right? You got HDMI, you got DisplayPort, you're good to go.
It's good to go. So before we get too deep into it, if you could talk, you've visited us in previous Newegg videos.
Yep, been here a couple times.
If you could just sort of introduce yourself to our audience. What do you do with GIGABYTE?
Sure. So I'm the product marketing manager, so I handle all the technical marketing. I do a lot of the press releases. I come and do these videos with you guys. It's really my job to explain the engineering behind something to the consumer, right? And not put a bunch of marketing hype in there. Just tell you what it is, what it does. And my favorite thing is talking about why we did it this way, right? Because we put a lot of time and effort kind of game planning what we want to make and what makes sense, to us anyways, because I can make my perfect monitor and that's only going to be good for me. I need to make a monitor that's going to appeal to everybody, or at least the audience that we're going for. So it's my job to tell you, why we did it this way, and it's your guys' job to kind of take a look at it, evaluate it, review it, and let us know what we can do better, what you liked, and we'll move on to the next one and see what we can do.
I was really glad to have you on because there are a lot of things about this monitor that kind of sound a little hypey that I think we can break down. But when I heard you were coming back on, I was glad because you also had one of my all-time favorite segments on Newegg Now where you just started taking apart video cards to show like the differences in heat sinks and stuff. And you're like, that's exactly the kind of breakdown I think this monitor needs. It's just getting right to the point.
I think Trish kind of freaked out too. She was like, no. Yeah, it was great. So yeah, I mean, spec-wise, this is a pretty high-end monitor, right? So we have IPS panel, 1440p, 144 hertz, DCI-P3, 95% color spectrum. So if you're somebody who does Adobe or works in that space,
very handy.
You know exactly what that is. So specs-wise, we put all the bells and whistles in there, but there's how many other monitors on Newegg that have those exact same specs, And so for this, we had to do something different. Not only because it was our first monitor, but because it had like the Aorus brand, right? And so for Aorus, I always try to say that we try to put a little bit of style and a lot of engineering, right? So we try to polish it up. We try to also make it something new and different on the inside. And that's basically what you have here with this on-screen display. All these cool features that we built into the monitor to help you game or to watch your videos, whether it's HDR, all of that stuff. We spent a lot of time developing this to come out with something that really shocked the market.
So I wanted to start off talking about panels, because that was a perfect segue, and I love pointing out segues. 1440p, a 144 hertz refresh rate, and we're talking FreeSync support with, because now we've gone through this transition with NVIDIA talking about their G-Sync support of FreeSync monitors. I was hoping you could walk our audience through what that means for the gaming experience, and then also like, what was that certification process like, where I'm sure you had to have a number of conversations with AMD and with NVIDIA about getting those labels slapped on properly.
Right, so the technology behind G-Sync and FreeSync is essentially the same concept, right? The same theory, it's just two different ways of going about it, right? And it's asynchronous. It's making sure that you're having the correct amount of frames on the screen. And so AMD went the open source way, and NVIDIA went with G-Sync and required a special module. They achieved the same goal, right? And they go about it different ways. And NVIDIA opened up their driver to allow FreeSync monitors to work with an NVIDIA graphics card. And so when that came out, we obviously submitted our monitor to that process. And in the meantime, you were able to kind of force it in the driver. There was an option that said like, enable G-Sync even though this hasn't been certified yet.
Right, yeah.
And good timing, today a driver came out that does have this monitor as certified. So you no longer have to check that extra box, one less step. But yeah, so this monitor is high enough spec to meet all the G-Sync requirements. It just doesn't have the G-Sync module in there.
So, but that's becoming less of a concern for gamers looking at that top tier.
If you are sitting in a desk, you would not be able to tell whether it was G-Sync compatible, G-Sync, or FreeSync. Right?
At this point, we've kind of blurred those lines in.
Correct.
Yeah.
There are some other premium things that NVIDIA has built into their chip, right? So if you use an NVIDIA chip, and I think they call them ultra or premium G-Sync displays now. So if you're going for like 4K or higher refresh rates, but no, at 144 hertz, it's going to be the same user experience, which is really what matters, right? Can I see a difference? Because if I can't see a difference and it's just a spec sheet, then that's great to talk about, right? And like theory craft about. But at the end of the day, when I'm playing my game, either way, you're good to go.
On top of all of this, we still have, again, you were mentioning those things that we all come to expect in a high-end monitor, HDR support, things like that. I was hoping you could just talk about the general design, because one of the things we were, especially some of the Newegg Ninjas, were happy to see again was a quality of life return to not having an external power brick.
Yes.
Without it looking like a monstrous, big, thick, clunky solution that sort of protrudes from the side of your desk.
Right, so sometimes when you try to do everything, you end up doing nothing, right? When you try to be all things to all people, you fail on every level, right? Because you can't do that. And so previously, a lot of gaming monitors would look like this. They'd be a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, and they have a little bit more bezel, right? And then we went to this bezel-less approach, and with that, you had to have an external power brick, just like a laptop, right? Something has to be powering this monitor aside from just the power cable. And so we went back to the drawing board and thought about what do we really want to accomplish with this, right? We want high-end spec, we want it to be for gamers, and we want it to feel and look like a gaming monitor. So rather than kind of skirt the middle, we just went all out in making it, a hefty monitor. Right? And so we built the power brick into the monitor itself. We did a lot of small things that you can't really see on camera, but you'll feel when you're using it, right? So GIGABYTE's an engineering company. It was founded by engineers. And so little things like when you move the monitor up or down.
So smooth.
It's smooth, but it also stays.
Yeah.
Right? And that seems innocuous. It seems like, duh, it stays. But it's not. A lot of monitors, when you push it down, it wants to slam to the bottom. When you push it up, it just wants
flings.
to...
My monitor flings.
It wants to elevate her up, right? And so something as tiny or insignificant as how it moves up and down is something we spent a lot of time on because we want this to feel like all the engineering that we put behind it. We want it to feel as premium as it looks, right? And so it's all these little things that we did kind of behind the scenes that give us what we have today.
Because we were talking a little before we jumped in front of the camera is like, I'm definitely not a common use case, but like I need my monitor at a different height when I'm podcasting than when I want to slouch and play a game. And when I go to make that monitor adjustment, my desk is wobbling and the screen is wobbling and it feels very insecure. Like it's a smooth action. Like the telescoping arm is a smooth action, but it doesn't really feel like it was built for you to make those adjustments. You make the adjustment once and that's where you leave it and you're not really supposed to touch it after that. Including the power management, the power brick into the design of the monitor, did that play a role in like weight distribution so that you're maintaining that feel for someone who's maybe a little bit more like me and finicky? And I like my setup one way for this thing and in a different way for another activity. Yeah, so interesting story behind that. We actually had the monitor and the software done well before we had the base done. The base took us the most amount of time, not just to distribute the weight, but the look of it, right? Because as somebody who's setting it up, even the cable management, right?
You take out a $600 monitor, you don't want to feel like you got a piece of plastic, right? And so we went back and forth on the design and how do we do the RGB and what's an elegant way of doing this and that, because when we're sitting here and we're looking at it, it looks amazing. But we want it to feel amazing when you actually take it out of the box, and that's a whole nother experience. I bought plenty of high-end stuff, and you take it out, and you're like, really?
Yeah.
You know, and there's some companies that do it really well. Apple is great at the way that they box things and just the experience of unboxing something. And so that's why it took us so long to figure out this base, is not just because we didn't want it to tilt over one way or another, but when you put the power brick in the back of it here, you also have to worry about heat. So this entire back, you wouldn't feel it, but it is acting as a heat sink, and there's enough surface area and enough actual airflow through the back of it that it doesn't change temperature. But we turned it into a heat sink so that you can do things like 144 hertz. There's an overdrive option where you can go up to like 160-ish depending on your panel. So all these things we didn't have restrictions of because we did something as simple as, okay, you got a huge chunk of metal, it's an instant heat sink, right? You know, and that's one of those little things that an engineer would look like and go, okay, that frees me up to do X, Y, and Z that I really wanted to do. And so we really didn't have a lot of limitations on what was physically possible with this monitor. It was more about our execution and our vision for it, right? And so that's why we built in all these cool things, you know, and along that same line, there's a joystick down here. I hate joysticks. I don't want to be fiddling with like the on-screen, press, you know, down 3 times and left twice to get to this menu. So anything you can do with the joystick, you can also do with the software. And most software that I've used, it's maybe 80%. There's 1 or 2 settings you have to use the joystick, whether it's changing the input, picture-in-picture, there's something that the joystick is required for. And so it's really important for us to build all the functionality into the software itself, so you never have to touch a joystick if you don't want to. Of course it's there, you know, if you get in a pinch, you don't have the software, whatever, but the software is 100% exactly the same menus that you would get from the display itself.
Well, and again, perfect segue. I want to talk about that sort of synergy. We're at a point, you just casually threw out there overdriving, overclocking a monitor, you know, based on specific characteristics of that panel. That's where we've gotten to with every aspect of the high-end computing experience. Can you walk us through a little of what this looks like from Aorus's, the Aorus perspective in controlling your hardware and augmenting your gaming experience?
So at this point, you're right. Everything has an integrated controller now. There's actually a chip on this that's running all this software and all of this, all these features. So this isn't being offloaded onto your computer. It's taking up no CPU cycles. The monitor is a computer, right? And it's displaying this software and it's learning or adapting on how to display it on your screen. So we've gone from kind of centralized computing where everything's on your system and it's spitting out images. This is actually being overlaid on top of the image. So the graphics card is doing the cool Aorus logo in the background. The monitor is doing the software. As far as the computer's concerned, this software doesn't exist, right? It doesn't see it because it's being displayed by the monitor. And so we've gotten to a point where everything is its own microprocessor. Everything has its own firmware. And because of that, we can upgrade the panel. So let's say we find out that a certain, you know, sharpness or contrast doesn't work really well, or there's a little bit of an issue with this specific card, or whatever your case is, we can just update the firmware because it's its own, you know, set of hardware.
It's not a back to manufacturer kind of situation.
Correct. It's not one of those, oh, well, you know, we'll get it right on the next one, like, you know, which happens, right? Like, there's some things that aren't fixable with software. You know, and so it was really important to us that we put something complete and something that we could update, right? Something that we could improve over time as either we got feedback or we learned how to do things better. Because one thing I can tell you about trying to do a new product is you learn new, better ways of doing things every day, right?
And you didn't have like a history of a certain type of model or a certain characteristic or something that you had to like satisfy a consumer base with.
Correct. So there's no pre-existing ideas of what it had to be. So it was whatever we wanted it to be, right? And so, you know, on top of that, there's things that we don't know yet that we may want to include in it, right? Something comes out next year, and we want to include that. Like, we can go back and look at the firmware and say, is this possible to do with the hardware we have, right? And so, you know, you never know where it's going to end up, but a lot of the most brilliant things, at least to me in tech, are ones that come out and you're like, why haven't we been doing that the whole time?
I was hoping we could get in and all the way back to when we got to first check this out at CES, the tactical display, that because this is an overlay and it's not being driven by the computer, can you talk us through some of those features like having aim assist.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you guys have to be getting feedback on that now, now that this thing is out in the wild.
So when we were talking about displaying this at CES, the word tactical came up, and I at first had an issue with it. I'm like, what makes it tactical? And we went through all of the different software, and it makes sense. So tactical is something that gives you an advantage over your opponent, right? And so things like aim assist or being able to draw your own crosshair give you an advantage, a competitive advantage over somebody else. And then we went even further and thought about what else can we do to trick people into being better gamers, right? And so, like you were talking about with aim assist, what we actually do is we interject a black frame every 6 to 10 frames or so. And so it looks like the screen gets a little darker, but what we're really doing is tricking your mind into slowing down and processing the frames that it is being registered. So you're still seeing 144 frames a second, but we're gonna add, like, let's say 6 black frames. So you're seeing 150, but your brain doesn't have to process those 6 black frames. And so to you, it feels like the game just slowed down. Now it's still being rendered at the same speed, at the same quality. It's psychologically different, right? And so that's something that we built into this, and we have little demos that you can kind of see online of tricking yourself into slowing down. And so when we do the example of like Counter-Strike, what you notice is that your bullets are in a tighter pattern. Not because we're changing the way that the gun reacts to recoil.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the software of the game.
We're not manipulating any game data. It still has the same recoil as it normally would, but because you're slowing down and not spraying as hard or as long, your grouping gets smaller and smaller. And so it's little things like this that make it like a tactical monitor. Being able to draw your own crosshair so that you can have, you know, a sniper gun and know exactly where the reticule is pointing. Now, this isn't new. Gamers have been drawing little dots on their monitors or putting a little sticky note, all kinds of stuff to accomplish the same thing for years. And so all of this has quick hotkeys that you can program in, so you can program it into your mouse or any of your keyboard, and so be able to quickly turn on or off your crosshairs. So we're not reinventing the wheel, we just consolidated all of it and made it super convenient for gamers to do things like this.
Have there been any conversations about like a gaming purity that with products like this being out on the market, that it's not a cheat, it's not something running on the computer that's changing the parameters of the game, but is this looked at as like a crutch or something that some gamers are having, you know, like, well, if I'm in a competitive setting and I don't get something like this, is that an unfair advantage for someone else?
I think it is, but I think it's a larger conversation, and not necessarily spurred or started by this monitor. It's something that each kind of community has within itself.
Because there's an arms race that happens when someone like, you know, again, when we got high DPI mice, you know, like there's a different twitch or a different feel that happens to something like that. Not necessarily, and that's why I don't even know, in the newness of esports, we want a standardized playing field. We want competitive advantages to be more player-based rather than tech-based. And we look at that in other sporting conditions too, you know, like car racing. You know, they have very strict parameters on what happens, but even for the more casual, high-level player, what has that conversation sort of looked like? You know, if you're able to incorporate aspects of gameplay on top of the display in a way that's not being driven by the software of the game, has there been any controversy about those types of features?
Not with the display specifically, but again, I don't think any of this is new. You know, like if you think of racing games, right? The guy who has 3 curved monitors and can see out his side mirrors without having to move, you know, pan around, like he can see the players on the side, and he may be racing against somebody who's on a 27-inch or 24-inch monitor, right? So is that a competitive advantage? As somebody who does play multiplayer games, and especially online games, like there needs to be some level playing field. So I think really that's up to the community to decide, you know, what is and isn't acceptable. I remember World of Warcraft when we used to play, and there was some people who were like, oh, I don't have all these overlays and skins and press one button to cast 15 different spells. And, you know,
macros were a really big deal, yeah.
I came from EverQuest, where if you wanted to chain heal, you guys all had to synchronize, and I have to press my button 3 seconds after you press your button, and the
Right.
next guy presses his button, and this guy is in Europe, and he actually has to press his button 2 seconds before because of the lag. Like, it was an art just to get things
Right.
chained together proproperly. And
Kids
so,
today don't know how good they've got it.
yeah, so I mean, is it an evolution? Is it unfair advantage? You know, I think it's really up to the communities to decide how to gauge that and
Or how to
what should be.
standardize their gameplay.
Yeah, and then on the professional side, for esports, we all use the same monitor, we use, you know, the same settings. I'm sure they're going through those iterations as well.
Right, and I'm sure when GIGABYTE and Aorus are looking at sort of outfitting or participating in a tournament, that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, so we just don't install the software.
So I have to nerd out, being the resident audio geek. This is the first time I think I've heard a truly practical, fast attack noise reduction for TeamSpeak that seemed effective. Outside of just the normal, like, well, noise reduction samples your sound and then cuts out stuff you don't want to hear. Can you talk us through just a little bit about what this monitor does that's unique in that regard for people that are trying to sort of TeamSpeak or chat in game?
Yeah, so it goes back to use case scenario and us thinking about gamers at home. So if you're a gamer at home, you got your computer set up, you probably have a headset with a microphone, and a lot of us talk to our friends, right? And so how do we improve that? So what we did is we built active noise canceling into the monitor itself. And it's not what you would normally think. Like, when I think noise canceling, I think of like a Bose headset. I'm on a plane.
Yes.
Right? It drums out, you know, the kid in the background, not so much, but it drums out the engines.
Yes.
But I can still hear that kid in the background,
Yeah,
right?
the baby crying is cutting right through.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we took that and we're like, how do we apply that to gaming, right? Because when noise canceling headphones came out, at least for me who travels a lot, it was kind of like, we should have had this all along. This is great. And so we took that and we built 3 microphones. They're actually down here in kind of the Aorus logo. We built 3 microphones into the monitor itself. And so what I do is I plug in my headset and we have the 3 microphones listening. I'm talking to you, you know, I'm in my house, you're in your house. And when I speak, you don't hear my background noise.
Right.
So it's really noise canceling of the audio that you're sending and not for you yourself. So if I'm just sitting at home listening to music, I can still hear all my background noise.
Right.
But if I'm sitting there talking to you, you can't hear my roommate playing Metallica. Or, you know, in my case, my wife in the kitchen or playing with the dog, or I'm not lucky enough to have my own room, you know, for gaming and streaming, right? Life is going on around me. And so it blocks out that noise in the background. And so to that end, what we had to do is build 3 microphones into the monitor that listen for the noise in the background. They compare versus the noise picked up on your microphone, and anything that doesn't match, it basically cancels out. So now when I'm talking to you, all you hear is my voice and none of the background noise. And as far as I know, that's the first time it's ever been built into a monitor or even been conceived as something that you would plug in your headset to your monitor.
This is the first one I've heard that actually does cut like key clack.
Yes. So if you have, you know, super loud blue keys, or, you know, you have a roommate.
I like my clacky, punchy keyboard, exactly.
Or you have a roommate who likes to play music, or, you know, whatever's going on in the background. It's actually interesting that you bring that up because the noise canceling that you get in headphones are tuned for constant sounds.
Yeah.
Right? And ours is actually the opposite, where it's looking for sharp discrepancies, right? So I'm here talking and my voice is at a certain pitch and it's okay with that. But it hears somebody drop a pot or a pan in the background and it instantly cancels that out because it knows that that is not a noise that you were trying to convey over the microphone system.
Right.
And we also thought about it from a gaming perspective. If I'm playing a game and I have my headset on, or more importantly, you have your headset on, you're listening to the game, right? You're listening for sounds in the game, and my voice is just to communicate with you. If you hear all of my background noise when you're playing your game, you're instantly taken out of the game, right? Yeah. And you're brought right back into the real world. And so that's really what we were going for here, is not to be able to, you know, record a new studio album.
Right.
It's to be in the game and listen to the sound that was intended within that game.
And the exciting thing being that it's not even your immersion on your monitor. It's the immersion of your teammates. Because I'm sure we have those friends of ours in our circle of online gameplay who think it's like totally fine to like scream into a gut rot cell phone
Yes.
headset as their audio solution, which just sounds awful.
Everybody has that friend.
That
right?
one friend who won't give up his like free in the box earbuds
Yes.
as his main solution.
Yeah, or somebody who likes to stream with just a normal microphone while playing music, so you can hear
Right.
their music because they want to broadcast that. I mean,
Ugh.
there's always that one guy, right? And so it really is just something that we built in that we thought would make it different. Right? And not different for the sake of being different, but
Right.
different for the sake of this is the kind of things we can do. This is the new spaces that we can go into with all this technology, right? If we're all gonna have similar panels and similar specs,
What's a differentiator?
what stands out?
Yeah.
And what am I going to use? Because having something that I can demo and it makes you go, wow, that's really great. And then you never use it at home isn't really, helping you much, right?
Yeah.
It's really more for us as a company to say, oh, look what we did. We want to build things into these monitors that are actually going to be used. And we want to hear feedback on, should we tune it a little bit different? When we were talking about the firmware, we can adjust the noise cancellation. So if we get a lot of feedback that it's too aggressive, it's not aggressive enough, we can modulate that. We have the hardware built in there, and it's just a couple of software tweaks to change some curves, much like you would like a fan curve on a graphics card.
Right.
We have the ability to tweak all of that, and so what's good for me may not be good for you, and if we, put a different slider in there, you can find something that works in your environment.
Based on the fact that this monitor is routinely sold out, I feel like it's safe to say that the response has been pretty positive.
Yeah. So we didn't know what to expect, right?
Right.
I mean, this is our first time in monitors, which means we don't have a lot of name recognition in that space. Obviously, we do in computer hardware in general, but we didn't know.
Right.
We just wanted to put out the best product we could and see what happened, and we were floored by the reaction. I mean, we were sold out, I think, within 6 days of launching it, and we've
Yeah.
been sold out since for the past 4 months. We keep up in the order and producing more and more, and they keep selling out. So we're pretty pleased with the reaction and what people are saying, in the comments, in a lot of the reviews on Newegg are super positive as well. So people seem to really like this monitor, and if you like this monitor, we got some cool stuff coming up too.
Well, I mean, I was gonna kick it out there as the joke, but like with everything that you guys learned in making this first one, you now have something to build off of. Is there something that didn't make it into this monitor that you feel like would be maybe a resolution or frame rate or controls? Is there something that you're starting to lean towards like in a future iteration of a product like this?
I'm a fan of curved monitors, so I want to see curved. There's also people that want like 240 hertz, right?
Right.
And like maybe a 24-inch panel. So there's tons of different sizes and resolutions we can go. You can go up to 4K, you can go down to 1080p, you can go up to 240 hertz. The good news is that we have all the R&D, and it just makes sense for us to expand out the line to what people want, right? We don't want to make another monitor that's exactly the same as everything else, right? We want to stand out in different ways. And so we do have a pretty aggressive Aorus roadmap for monitors specifically. And so I know you guys are going to be at Computex. If I were to launch something, that would be a good time
To check out, maybe?
Yeah, possibly.
Could be some news.
If I was a betting man, that'd be where I would go. But yeah, I mean, because of the reaction and because of all the R&D that we put into it, you can expect a lot more, peripherals, monitors, things of that nature coming out very shortly.
Well, thanks for dropping by. I love these conversations, and I was glad to have you back so we could chat about this.
Yeah,
So.
thanks. Anytime. See you next time.
All right. So, folks, we'll have some links below where you can find more information on the Aorus AD27QD. Makes so much sense in my brain now that you explained what all those letters and numbers stand for. Stay tuned to the Newegg YouTube channel because we will have some new videos coming out soon. Exciting new technologies, some really fun products to test drive. You're going to want to make sure you check that out. You don't want to miss it. For Newegg Studios, I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, and I will catch you all on the next video.